The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Eldermore Palace as young Prince Adrian practiced his sword work under the watchful eye of Master Gareth. The 10-year-old heir to the throne moved with surprising grace for his age, his golden hair catching the light as he executed each precise movement his instructor had taught him. "Excellent form, Your Highness," Master Gareth called out, adjusting his leather gloves. "Your father will be pleased with your progress when he returns from the northern provinces." Adrian lowered his practice sword, breathing heavily but smiling with pride. The prince had been working tirelessly to prove himself worthy of the crown that would one day rest upon his head. Unlike many royal children who spent their days in luxury and leisure, Adrian took his future responsibilities seriously. From across the courtyard, a commotion near the palace gates caught their attention. A magnificent carriage adorned with silver trim and pulled by 4 white horses was approaching. The royal guard snapped to attention as they recognized the insignia of Queen Alara's house, the silver phoenix rising from blue flames. "It appears Her Majesty has arrived for the harvest celebration," Master Gareth observed, sheathing his own sword. "Perhaps you should prepare to greet our guests, my prince." Adrian nodded eagerly. The annual harvest celebration brought together nobles from across the realm, and he always enjoyed meeting visitors from distant lands. He hurried toward the palace entrance, his boots clicking against the marble steps as servants bustled about preparing for the royal reception. Queen Alara emerged from her carriage with regal dignity, her deep blue gown flowing like water as she stepped onto the palace grounds. Beside her stood a young man of perhaps 16 years, tall and lean with dark hair and piercing green eyes. This was Thomas, Queen Alara's eldest son from her first marriage, known throughout the kingdom for his quick temper and ambitious nature. "Your Majesty," Adrian said, bowing respectfully as he had been taught. "Welcome to Eldermore Palace. My father sends his regrets that urgent matters in the northern provinces prevent him from greeting you personally." Queen Alara smiled warmly, though there seemed to be something calculating in her expression. "Prince Adrian, how you've grown since our last meeting. Allow me to present my son, Lord Thomas." Thomas stepped forward, his bow perfunctory at best. "Prince Adrian," he said, his voice carrying an edge that made the young prince slightly uncomfortable. "I trust you've been keeping yourself busy with your studies." There was something mocking in Thomas's tone that Adrian didn't quite understand, but he maintained his polite demeanor. "Indeed, Lord Thomas. Master Gareth has been teaching me sword work, and I've been studying languages and diplomacy with the court scholars." "How admirable," Thomas replied, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps we might spar together during my visit. I'd be curious to see what the future king has learned." Before Adrian could respond, Captain Marcus of the Royal Guard approached them. The seasoned warrior's presence commanded immediate respect, his scarred face and powerful build speaking to years of loyal service to the crown. His hand rested casually on the pommel of his sword, a gesture that was both natural and subtly protective. "Your Majesty, Lord Thomas," Captain Marcus said with a respectful nod. "I trust your journey was pleasant. We've prepared the East Wing for your stay, and additional guards have been assigned to ensure your comfort and security." Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly as they met Captain Marcus's steady gaze. "How thorough of you, Captain, though I hardly think such measures necessary among friends." "The safety of all royal guests is my primary concern, my lord," Captain Marcus replied evenly. "It's a responsibility I take quite seriously." As they spoke, more carriages began arriving in the courtyard. Lords and ladies from across the realm had come to celebrate the harvest and pay their respects to the royal family. The palace came alive with activity as servants rushed to accommodate the growing number of distinguished guests. Adrian excused himself to change into more formal attire for the welcoming feast. As he walked through the palace corridors, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about this visit. Thomas's behavior troubled him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. In his chambers, Adrian's personal attendant, old Willem, helped him into his ceremonial doublet, deep green silk with golden embroidery that marked his status as heir to the throne. Willem had served the royal family for over 30 years and possessed an almost supernatural ability to read the moods and intentions of those around him. "You seem troubled, young master," Willem observed as he adjusted the prince's collar. "Was your sword practice not satisfactory today?" The practice went well, Adrian replied thoughtfully. It's our guests that concern me. There's something about Queen Alara's son that feels wrong. Willem's weathered hands paused in their work. Trust your instincts, Prince Adrian. They serve royalty better than any weapon or shield. But remember also to be fair in your judgments. Sometimes what appears as hostility is merely the awkwardness of youth trying to find its place in the world. Adrian nodded, appreciating Willem's wisdom as always. The old servant had a way of putting complex situations into perspective that helped the young prince navigate the often treacherous waters of court politics. As evening approached, the great hall filled with the kingdom's nobility. Long tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh fruits, and fine wines. The harvest celebration was traditionally a time of joy and thanksgiving, when the realm's prosperity was displayed for all to see. King Edmund's absence was keenly felt, but Queen Alara graciously took her place at the head table beside Adrian. Throughout the feast, she regaled the assembled nobles with tales of her travels and observations about the state of neighboring kingdoms. Her wit and intelligence were evident, but Adrian noticed how she seemed to be gathering information as much as sharing it. Thomas, meanwhile, had positioned himself among a group of younger nobles who hung on his every word. Adrian watched as his guests spun tales of military conquests and political intrigue, always casting himself as the hero of each story. There was a magnetic quality to Thomas that drew people to him, but Adrian found himself questioning the truth of these elaborate tales. As the evening wore on, entertainment was provided by traveling minstrels and court performers. Acrobats tumbled across the floor, while musicians filled the air with lively melodies. It was during one particularly energetic performance that Adrian noticed Thomas slip away from the festivities. Curiosity overcoming caution, the young prince quietly followed his guest through the palace corridors. Thomas moved with purpose, clearly familiar with the layout despite this being his first visit to Eldermore Palace. This struck Adrian as odd. How could someone navigate so confidently through unfamiliar halls? Thomas eventually stopped at the entrance to the royal library, one of the most restricted areas of the palace. Adrian watched from the shadows as his guest produced a small metal tool and began working at the lock. The skill with which Thomas manipulated the mechanism suggested this was not his first time breaking into secured areas. Just as Thomas succeeded in opening the door, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Captain Marcus rounded the corner on his evening patrol, his trained eyes immediately taking in the scene. Thomas straightened quickly, attempting to look casual, but the captain's sharp gaze missed nothing. "Lord Thomas," Captain Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. "The celebrations continue in the Great Hall. Is there something specific you were seeking in this part of the palace?" Thomas's quick mind scrambled for an explanation. "I was simply exploring, Captain. Old castles fascinate me, and I was hoping to examine some of the historical texts I've heard so much about." "The library is normally closed to visitors during evening hours," Captain Marcus replied. "Perhaps tomorrow I could arrange for the chief librarian to give you a proper tour." "Of course," Thomas agreed, though his smile was tight with frustration. "How considerate of you to offer." Adrian retreated deeper into the shadows as the two men passed his hiding spot. His heart raced with the implications of what he had witnessed. Why would Thomas try to break into the royal library? What could he possibly hope to find there that couldn't be obtained through proper channels? The young prince waited until both figures had disappeared before making his way back to his own chambers. Sleep came fitfully that night as he wrestled with questions about their guest's true intentions. Willem had advised him to trust his instincts, and every fiber of his being suggested that Thomas posed some kind of threat to the kingdom. The next morning brought new challenges as the harvest celebration continued with outdoor activities and competitions. Adrian tried to maintain his usual enthusiasm for these events, but he found himself constantly watching Thomas for signs of suspicious behavior. During the archery competition, Thomas displayed remarkable skill, hitting target after target with deadly accuracy. The crowd cheered his performance, but Adrian noticed how the young man's eyes constantly scanned the palace walls and guard positions. It was the behavior of someone assessing weaknesses rather than simply enjoying the festivities. Queen Alara seemed pleased by her son's popularity among the nobles, but Adrian detected subtle signals passing between mother and son throughout the day. They were communicating in some kind of code, sharing information in plain sight while appearing to engage in casual conversation. As the day progressed, Adrian made a decision that would change everything. He needed to know more about their guests' true purposes, and that meant taking risks his tutors would never approve of. The safety of the kingdom might depend on uncovering whatever plot was unfolding within the palace walls. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not only Adrian's courage, but also the loyalty of those sworn to protect the royal family. In the gathering shadows of Eldermore Palace, forces were moving that would challenge everything the young prince had been taught about honor, duty, and the true nature of power. The morning of the second day brought an unexpected proposal from Queen Alara during the royal breakfast. She suggested that the young people of the court should engage in a special competition to honor the harvest season, a treasure hunt throughout the palace grounds that would test their wit, courage, and knowledge of history. It would be educational for Prince Adrian, she explained to the assembled courtiers, her voice carrying the perfect blend of maternal concern and diplomatic wisdom. And it would give our young guests an opportunity to explore the rich heritage of Eldermore Palace. The proposal was met with enthusiastic approval from the gathered nobles, who saw it as an excellent way to entertain their children while continuing their own political discussions. Adrian felt a mixture of excitement and unease. While he loved exploring the palace's hidden passages and forgotten chambers, something about Queen Alara's eager promotion of this idea troubled him. Thomas stepped forward with a confident smile. An excellent suggestion, Mother. I'm particularly interested in learning about the legendary crown vault that houses the kingdom's most precious artifacts. Perhaps the treasure hunt could include some historical riddles about the royal regalia? Adrian's blood ran cold. The crown vault was the most secure location in the entire palace, containing not only the ceremonial crowns, but also ancient treaties, maps of strategic locations, and other state secrets that could compromise the kingdom's security. How did Thomas know about its existence? And why was he so interested in it? Captain Marcus, who had been standing quietly near the wall, stepped forward. With respect, Your Majesty, the crown vault and certain other areas of the palace are restricted for security reasons. However, I'm sure we can design an engaging treasure hunt using the public areas and some of the historical chambers that would provide plenty of challenge and education. Thomas's eyes flashed with momentary anger before he quickly masked it with another smile. Of course, Captain. Security must always be the priority. I'm sure whatever you arrange will be perfectly adequate for our entertainment. The word adequate dripped with subtle contempt, and Adrian noticed how several of the younger nobles shifted uncomfortably at the implied criticism of Captain Marcus. The captain himself remained impassive, but Adrian caught a slight tightening around his eyes that suggested he too had registered Thomas's disrespectful tone. Queen Alara smoothed over the moment with practiced diplomacy. Captain Marcus is absolutely right, of course. Perhaps he could work with my son to design appropriate challenges that would be both safe and stimulating for our young participants. As the breakfast concluded and the adults dispersed to their various activities, Adrian found himself walking beside Thomas through the palace corridors. Other young nobles chatted excitedly about the upcoming treasure hunt, but Adrian's attention was focused on his suspicious guest. You seem very knowledgeable about our palace's history, Adrian commented carefully. Have you studied Eldermore's architecture and legends extensively? Thomas glanced at him with that familiar calculating expression. I make it a point to learn about any place I visit, Prince Adrian. Knowledge is power, as they say. One never knows when understanding the layout of a building or the location of important rooms might prove useful. The way Thomas emphasized the word useful sent chills down Adrian's spine. This was no casual interest in history or architecture. This was reconnaissance, plain and simple. Thomas was gathering intelligence about the palace's layout and security for some unknown purpose. I'm curious, Adrian pressed on, trying to keep his voice casual. What made you think about the crown vault specifically? Most visitors are more interested in the throne room or the portrait gallery. Thomas stopped walking and turned to face Adrian directly. For a moment, his mask of friendly courtesy slipped, and Adrian saw something cold and dangerous in his green eyes. You ask a lot of questions for such a young prince. Perhaps you should focus on enjoying our visit rather than interrogating your guests. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Adrian felt his heart rate increase, but he forced himself to maintain eye contact. I'm simply interested in what fascinates my guests. As future king, I should understand what draws people's attention when they visit our home. Indeed, Thomas replied, his smile returning but lacking any warmth. You'll make a very attentive ruler someday, Prince Adrian. Assuming you live long enough to inherit the throne, of course. Before Adrian could respond to this shocking statement, Thomas had turned and walked away, leaving the young prince standing alone in the corridor with his mind reeling. Had Thomas just threatened his life? The words could be interpreted as merely unfortunate phrasing, but combined with everything else Adrian had observed, they felt like something much more sinister. Adrian knew he needed help, but who could he trust? His father was still away in the northern provinces, and most of the palace staff were too busy with the celebrations to pay attention to his concerns. Captain Marcus seemed like the obvious choice, but Adrian worried that making accusations against Queen Alara's son without concrete proof might cause a diplomatic incident. As he pondered his options, Adrian noticed young Lady Elizabeth approaching from the opposite direction. Elizabeth was the daughter of Lord William, one of his father's most trusted advisors, and she possessed an intelligence and courage that had always impressed Adrian. More importantly, she had spent enough time at court to understand the subtle currents of palace politics. Elizabeth, Adrian called out, relief evident in his voice. Might I speak with you privately about something important? Lady Elizabeth was 15 years old with auburn hair and sharp brown eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. She had been raised to understand the complexities of court life and had already proven herself adept at navigating the sometimes treacherous waters of noble society. Of course, Adrian, she replied, noting the concern in his voice. Perhaps we could walk in my father's private study? It's quite secure there. As they made their way to Lord William's study, Adrian quickly explained his observations about Thomas's behavior, the attempted break into the library, his knowledge of restricted areas, and the veiled threats that had become increasingly obvious. Elizabeth listened intently, asking perceptive questions that helped Adrian organize his thoughts and concerns. Your instincts are sound, Elizabeth concluded after hearing the full account. Thomas's behavior suggests someone conducting reconnaissance for a specific purpose. The question is whether Queen Alara is complicit in whatever he's planning, or if she's simply a doting mother who doesn't see her son's true nature. What should we do? Adrian asked. I can't accuse a royal guest of plotting against the crown without evidence, but I also can't ignore the potential threat to the kingdom. Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, considering their options. We need to be clever about this. If Thomas is planning something for during the treasure hunt, that gives us an opportunity to catch him in the act. But we'll need help from someone with authority and experience. Captain Marcus, Adrian said immediately. But how do we approach him without seeming like children with overactive imaginations? Leave that to me, Elizabeth replied with a confident smile. My father has taught me a few things about presenting evidence and building a convincing case. We'll need to observe Thomas carefully today and document anything suspicious. Then, we can present our concerns to Captain Marcus with specific examples rather than vague worries. They spent the rest of the morning discreetly watching Thomas's activities. The young man seemed to be mapping the palace systematically, engaging various servants in casual conversation about their duties and the locations of important rooms. He showed particular interest in guard rotation schedules and the timing of routine security checks. During lunch, Thomas made several comments that seemed designed to test the reactions of palace staff. He asked about the procedures for accessing the vault levels, inquired about which guards had master keys to restricted areas, and even joked about how easy it might be for someone to get lost in the palace's many corridors and chambers. Elizabeth proved to be an excellent partner in surveillance, noting details that Adrian might have missed and helping to interpret the significance of Thomas's various probing questions. By afternoon, they had compiled a substantial list of suspicious behaviors that painted a clear picture of someone planning unauthorized access to secure areas. The treasure hunt was scheduled to begin at sunset, giving the participants time to prepare and allowing the adult nobles to conclude their formal discussions of trade agreements and regional politics. As the hour approached, Adrian and Elizabeth sought out Captain Marcus to share their concerns. They found the captain in the armory, personally inspecting weapons and security equipment with his characteristic thoroughness. When Adrian explained their observations and worries, Captain Marcus listened with the serious attention that had made him such an effective protector of the royal family. "Your concerns are valid," Captain Marcus said after reviewing Elizabeth's carefully documented notes. "I've had my own suspicions about Lord Thomas's behavior, but I wanted to gather more evidence before taking action. Your observations fill in several gaps in the pattern. What do you think he's planning?" Adrian asked. "Based on his questions and areas of interest, I suspect he intends to use the confusion of the treasure hunt to access the Crown Vault or another restricted area," Captain Marcus replied grimly. "The question is whether he's working alone or as part of a larger conspiracy." "What about Queen Alara?" Elizabeth inquired. "Do you think she knows what her son is planning?" Captain Marcus considered this carefully. Queen Alara is an intelligent woman with her own political ambitions. Whether she's actively involved in Thomas's scheme or simply turning a blind eye to his activities, I can't say for certain. But we must prepare for either possibility. The captain outlined a plan that would allow Thomas to reveal his intentions while ensuring that any attempt to breach palace security would be thwarted. Additional guards would be positioned strategically throughout the palace, and Captain Marcus himself would shadow the treasure hunt participants to intervene if necessary. "I want both of you to participate in the treasure hunt as planned," Captain Marcus instructed. "Act naturally, but keep close watch on Thomas's movements. If he attempts to separate from the group or access restricted areas, signal me immediately." As sunset approached and the treasure hunt participants gathered in the main courtyard, Adrian felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. The next few hours would reveal whether his suspicions about Thomas were justified, and possibly determine the future security of the kingdom. Thomas arrived at the gathering with his usual confident demeanor, but Adrian noticed a tension in his posture that suggested barely contained excitement. Whatever the young man had planned, he was eager to put it into motion. Queen Alara appeared to oversee the beginning of the hunt, offering encouraging words to all the participants while subtly positioning herself where she could observe the proceedings. Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching for something specific, waiting for a signal or event that would trigger the next phase of whatever plot was unfolding. Captain Marcus distributed the first set of riddles that would lead the young nobles through various chambers and corridors of the palace. The challenges were cleverly designed to keep the participants moving and engaged while allowing the guards to monitor their progress effectively. As the treasure hunt began and the participants dispersed throughout the palace, Adrian stayed close to Thomas while trying to appear casual and enthusiastic about the competition. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everyone's courage, wit, and loyalty to the crown. The treasure hunt had been underway for barely an hour when Thomas made his move. The participants had been divided into small groups, each following different sets of clues that would eventually lead them to various prizes hidden throughout the palace. Adrian had managed to stay in the same group as Thomas, along with Elizabeth and two other young nobles. Their current clue had led them to the ancient tapestry hall, where centuries-old weavings depicted the great battles and victories of Adrian's ancestors. The other participants were enthusiastically examining the intricate artwork, searching for hidden symbols that would reveal their next destination. But Adrian noticed that Thomas seemed distracted, constantly glancing toward the corridor that led to the restricted sections of the palace. "This tapestry shows the Battle of Windermere," Elizabeth said loudly, pointing to an elaborate scene of armored knights. "Perhaps the next clue is hidden behind it?" While the others moved to investigate Elizabeth's suggestion, Thomas quietly stepped back from the group. Adrian caught Elizabeth's eye and nodded slightly. She had created the perfect distraction. As Thomas began to edge toward the corridor, Adrian followed at a careful distance. Thomas moved with practiced stealth through the palace corridors, clearly following a predetermined route. Adrian stayed far enough behind to avoid detection while maintaining visual contact. His heart pounded as he realized they were heading directly toward the vault levels, the most heavily secured area of the entire palace. As they descended a narrow stone staircase that few people ever used, Adrian heard the soft sound of metal against metal. Thomas was picking another lock, this time on a heavy wooden door that led to the vault antechamber. Adrian pressed himself against the wall, watching as his suspect worked with obvious expertise. The door swung open silently, and Thomas disappeared into the darkened chamber beyond. Adrian waited a few moments before following, using skills Master Gareth had taught him about moving quietly in armor. The antechamber was dimly lit by oil lamps, and Adrian could hear Thomas moving deeper into the vault complex. What Adrian saw next made his blood run cold. Thomas was not alone. Two figures in dark clothing were waiting for him, palace guards that Adrian recognized, but who were clearly working as accomplices in whatever plot was unfolding. One of them handed Thomas a set of keys that could only have come from someone with high-level security clearance. The timing must be perfect, Thomas whispered urgently. Mother will create the distraction upstairs in exactly 15 minutes. That should give us enough time to retrieve the documents and escape through the eastern passage. What about the prince? One of the guards asked. He's been watching you closely. Should we eliminate him as a potential threat? Adrian's hands trembled as he realized they were discussing his possible murder with the same casual tone they might use to discuss the weather. This was no simple theft. This was treason on the highest level, involving Queen Alara herself and corrupted members of the palace guard. Leave the boy for now, Thomas replied coldly. Once we have what we came for, his fate will be irrelevant. The kingdom's leadership will change hands soon enough, and Prince Adrian will no longer be a concern. The full scope of the conspiracy began to dawn on Adrian. This wasn't just about stealing documents or treasures. This was an attempt to overthrow his father's rule. Queen Alara and her son were planning some kind of coup, using their position as honored guests to access the most sensitive areas of the palace. Adrian knew he had to act quickly, but he was vastly outnumbered, and the corrupted guards were armed while he carried only a ceremonial dagger. He needed to reach Captain Marcus immediately, but that would mean leaving Thomas and his accomplices free to complete their mission. Making a desperate decision, Adrian began to quietly retreat up the stairs. He needed to alert the loyal guards before Thomas could steal whatever documents he was after. But as he reached the main level, he found his path blocked by another figure, Queen Alara herself, dressed in dark clothing and clearly prepared for action. Prince Adrian, she said with a smile that never reached her eyes. How enterprising of you to follow my son. I'm afraid your curiosity has put you in a very dangerous position. Adrian straightened his shoulders, calling upon every lesson in royal dignity he had ever received. Your Majesty, I must insist that you call off whatever operation is taking place in the vaults. This constitutes an act of war against my father's kingdom. Queen Alara laughed softly. Your father's kingdom? Oh, my dear child, you misunderstand the situation entirely. Your father's reign is coming to an end, whether he realizes it or not. The northern provinces he's so concerned about? They're in open revolt, supported by my forces and several other kingdoms who have grown tired of his weak leadership. The revelation hit Adrian like a physical blow. The urgent matters that had called his father away were not administrative issues, but a carefully orchestrated rebellion. His father was fighting for his life and his crown in the north while enemies struck at the heart of his kingdom from within. You're lying, Adrian said, though doubt crept into his voice. My father is the rightful king, chosen by the people and blessed by the old laws. The old laws are exactly that, old, Queen Alara replied dismissively. The realm needs stronger leadership, someone with the vision and courage to expand our borders and increase our power. Thomas will make an excellent king once the transition is complete. The transition? Adrian's mind raced to understand the full implications. You mean assassination? Queen Alara's expression hardened. I mean whatever is necessary to secure the future of this realm. Your father has had his chance to lead, and he has proven inadequate. It's time for a new generation to take control. As they spoke, Adrian heard footsteps on the stairs behind him. Thomas was returning from the vaults, carrying what appeared to be several rolled documents and a small, ornate box. His expression was triumphant until he saw his mother confronting Adrian. Mother, what are you doing? Thomas demanded. This wasn't part of the plan. The boy followed you, Queen Alara explained. He knows about the operation. Thomas's face darkened as he looked at Adrian. Then, we have no choice. He can't be allowed to interfere with what we've accomplished tonight. Adrian found himself trapped between the two conspirators, with nowhere to run and no way to call for help. The palace corridors that had always felt like home now seemed like a maze designed to prevent his escape. He gripped his ceremonial dagger, knowing it would be of little use against trained opponents, but determined to fight for his life and his kingdom. "You don't have to do this," Adrian said, trying to buy time and hoping that Captain Marcus would soon discover his absence from the treasure hunt. There's still time to abandon this plot before it becomes treason beyond forgiveness. Thomas stepped closer, his hand moving to the sword at his side. "The only treason here is your father's failure to recognize the changing times. The old order is dying, Prince Adrian, and we're simply helping it along. The old order includes concepts like honor and loyalty," Adrian replied, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "Concepts that apparently mean nothing to you or your mother." Queen Alara's face flushed with anger. "Don't lecture us about honor, child. Your father has shown no honor in his treatment of neighboring kingdoms, no honor in his failure to expand our influence when opportunities presented themselves. We're correcting his mistakes." As the argument continued, Adrian noticed something that gave him hope. The oil lamps in the corridor were beginning to flicker, which usually meant that the evening patrol was conducting their routine security checks. Captain Marcus had trained the guards to extinguish lights in certain patterns as a way of communicating their positions to each other. If Adrian could just hold out a few more minutes, help might arrive. But Thomas was growing impatient with the standoff, and Adrian could see him preparing to draw his weapon. "Enough talk," Thomas declared. "We have what we came for, and we need to reach the rendezvous point before the other guards discover what's happened." "What about the prince?" Queen Alara asked. Thomas's smile was cold and calculating. "The prince has unfortunately suffered a tragic accident during the treasure hunt. Such a shame for someone so young to fall down those steep vault stairs." Adrian knew his time had run out. Thomas was moving toward him with clear intent, and Queen Alara was positioning herself to block any escape route. The young prince prepared to fight for his life, knowing that the fate of the kingdom might depend on whether he could survive the next few minutes. Just as Thomas reached for his sword, the sound of running footsteps echoed through the corridors above them. Captain Marcus's voice could be heard calling out orders to his men, and Adrian realized that his absence from the treasure hunt had finally been noticed. "The guards are coming," Queen Alara hissed urgently. "We need to leave immediately." Thomas hesitated, torn between his desire to eliminate Adrian and his need to escape with the stolen documents. That moment of indecision proved crucial as the footsteps grew louder and the voices of loyal guards became clearer. "This way," Queen Alara commanded, pulling her son toward a side passage that Adrian hadn't noticed before. "We can reach the eastern exit before they organize a proper search." As the conspirators fled, Adrian found himself alone in the corridor with his heart still pounding from the confrontation. He could hear Captain Marcus and the guards spreading throughout the palace, systematically searching for signs of the intruders they now knew were present. Adrian called out as loudly as he could, his young voice echoing off the stone walls. "Captain Marcus, down here. The vaults have been breached." Within moments, the sound of heavily armed men racing down the stairs filled the corridor. Captain Marcus appeared first, his sword drawn and his face grim with determination. Behind him came 6 of his most trusted guards, all prepared for battle. "Prince Adrian," Captain Marcus exclaimed with relief. "Are you injured?" "We discovered that several guards were missing from their posts and found evidence of break-ins throughout the restricted areas." "I'm unharmed," Adrian replied quickly. "But Queen Alara and Thomas have stolen documents from the Crown Vault. They're part of a larger conspiracy involving the rebellion in the northern provinces. They escaped through the eastern passage just moments ago." Captain Marcus's expression grew even more serious as he processed this information. "How much of a head start do they have?" "Maybe 2 or 3 minutes, Adrian estimated. "But, Captain, they had help from palace guards. Some of your men are working with them." This revelation struck Captain Marcus like a thunderbolt. The possibility of corruption within his own ranks was the security nightmare he had always feared most. It meant that the conspiracy was even more extensive than they had initially realized. "Sergeant Wells," Captain Marcus barked to one of his men. "Take half the squad and pursue the fugitives through the Eastern Passage. Remember, Queen Alara is still technically a royal guest, so use only necessary force. As the guards rushed to execute his orders, Captain Marcus turned his attention back to Adrian. Tell me everything that happened, Prince Adrian. Every detail could be crucial to understanding the full scope of this plot. Adrian quickly recounted the entire evening's events, from Thomas's behavior during the treasure hunt to the confrontation in the corridor. Captain Marcus listened intently, his experienced mind already working on the implications and necessary responses. We must secure the palace immediately, Captain Marcus concluded. If Thomas and Queen Alara were working with corrupted guards, there may be other threats we haven't discovered yet. And we need to send word to your father about the true situation in the northern provinces. As they spoke, the sound of pursuit echoed through the eastern passages. The chase was on, but Adrian knew that whatever documents Thomas had stolen could already be on their way to enemy forces. The battle for the kingdom was far from over, and the young prince realized that his life had changed forever in the span of a single evening. The pursuit through the eastern passages proved futile. By the time Captain Marcus's men reached the outer walls of the palace, Queen Alara and Thomas had vanished into the night, taking with them whatever secrets they had stolen from the crown vault. The discovery of rope and climbing equipment hidden near the outer wall confirmed that their escape had been meticulously planned well in advance. Captain Marcus stood in the pre-dawn darkness, his breath forming clouds in the cold air as he surveyed the evidence of the conspiracy that had nearly succeeded. The corrupted guards had been captured during the pursuit, but their interrogation revealed only fragments of a larger plot that stretched far beyond the palace walls. Sir, Sergeant Wells reported grimly, we've identified 3 more guards who were compromised. They've been taken into custody, but 2 others appear to have fled with the Queen and her son. The scope of the infiltration was staggering. Queen Alara had spent months, perhaps years, positioning her agents within the palace guard and establishing the network that had nearly toppled the kingdom in a single night. Captain Marcus felt the weight of his failure to detect the conspiracy earlier, though he knew that dwelling on regret would not help protect his remaining charges. Prince Adrian had insisted on joining the search efforts despite Captain Marcus's attempts to keep him safely within the palace interior. The young prince's courage during the crisis had impressed the veteran soldier, but it had also revealed how much danger the royal family faced from enemies both within and without the kingdom. What did they steal? Adrian asked as they examined the vault where Thomas had conducted his operation. The heavy doors stood open, their sophisticated locks defeated by tools that could only have been provided by someone with intimate knowledge of the palace's security systems. Captain Marcus surveyed the scene with professional thoroughness. Several document cases had been opened and their contents removed, but the most valuable items appeared to be untouched. The ceremonial crowns and treasure are still here, he observed. Whatever they were after was specific, not simply valuable. Old Willem, who had served as keeper of the royal archives for over 20 years, examined the empty cases with growing concern. His weathered hands shook slightly as he realized what was missing. The strategic maps, he whispered. The complete military assessments of our border fortifications, guard rotations, and defensive capabilities. Prince Adrian, they've stolen the information needed to invade the kingdom successfully. The full magnitude of the threat became clear to everyone present. Queen Alara hadn't been planning a simple palace coup. She had been gathering intelligence for a full-scale military invasion. The documents Thomas had stolen would allow enemy forces to bypass the kingdom's strongest defenses and strike directly at its most vulnerable points. How long do we have? Adrian asked, his young mind grappling with the enormity of the situation. Captain Marcus considered the timing carefully. If they have fast horses and a clear route to their allies, the stolen information could reach enemy commanders within 2 days. Combined with the rebellion already underway in the northern provinces, we could face coordinated attacks from multiple directions within a week. As dawn broke over Eldermore Palace, messengers were dispatched to every corner of the kingdom. Warning signals were lit on the ancient beacon towers, alerting distant garrisons to prepare for possible attack. The palace itself was locked down under emergency protocols, with only the most trusted guards allowed access to sensitive areas. Adrian found himself thrust into responsibilities far beyond his years. With his father still fighting in the north and the kingdom under immediate threat, many of the nobles looked to the young prince for leadership and reassurance. The boy who had been practicing sword forms just days earlier was now helping to coordinate the defense of an entire realm. "We need to warn my father," Adrian told Captain Marcus as they reviewed defensive preparations in the war room. If the Northern Rebellion was coordinated with this palace infiltration, he could be walking into a trap. Captain Marcus nodded grimly. "I've already sent our fastest riders north with coded messages. But the rebels may have cut the main roads, and our messengers might not reach the king in time." The next several hours brought a steady stream of disturbing reports. Border scouts reported unusual military activity in neighboring kingdoms. Several minor nobles who had attended the harvest celebration had departed hastily during the night, suggesting that Queen Alera's network of supporters was larger than anyone had suspected. Elizabeth proved invaluable during the crisis, using her extensive knowledge of court politics to identify which nobles could be trusted and which might be compromised. Her father, Lord William, took charge of securing the loyalty of regional governors and organizing local militias to supplement the regular army. "We need to consider the possibility that this was only the beginning," Elizabeth warned during one of their strategy sessions. "If Queen Alera has been planning this for years, she may have agents embedded throughout the kingdom, not just in the palace." Her assessment proved prophetic. By midday, reports arrived of simultaneous uprisings in 3 different provinces. The rebellions were too well coordinated to be spontaneous. They were clearly part of the same conspiracy that had nearly succeeded in the palace. Adrian made a decision that surprised even his closest advisors. "I'm going north to find my father," he announced during an emergency council meeting. "The kingdom needs unified leadership, and we need to coordinate our response to these multiple threats." "Absolutely not," Captain Marcus replied immediately. "Prince Adrian, you're the heir to the throne. Your safety is paramount, especially now when the succession could determine the kingdom's survival." "My safety means nothing if the kingdom falls while I hide behind palace walls," Adrian countered with a determination that reminded everyone present of his royal bloodline. "My father needs to know what happened here, and our forces need to see that the royal family stands together in this crisis." The debate continued for hours, with experienced military leaders arguing against what they saw as an unnecessarily dangerous mission. But Adrian had inherited not only his father's crown but also his stubborn commitment to duty, and he refused to be swayed by concerns for his personal safety. Finally, a compromise was reached. Adrian would travel north with a substantial military escort, but their route would take them through loyal territories where they could gather reinforcements and assess the true extent of the rebellion. Captain Marcus would personally lead the escort, leaving the palace defense to his most trusted lieutenant. As preparations for the journey began, more troubling news arrived. A merchant caravan had reported seeing Queen Alera and a substantial military force moving toward the eastern border. The stolen palace documents were likely already in enemy hands, and invasion seemed imminent. "We're not just fighting a rebellion anymore," Lord William observed grimly. "We're facing a coordinated attack by multiple kingdoms, using our own security information against us." The situation deteriorated further when scouts reported that the main road north had been cut by rebel forces. Adrian's mission to reach his father would require traveling through hostile territory with no guarantee of success. The young prince would be placing himself in mortal danger for the slim chance of reuniting the royal family when the kingdom needed leadership most. On the evening before their departure, Adrian stood in his chambers looking out at the palace grounds where he had played as a child. Old Willem helped him pack the essential items he would need for the journey, including his father's ceremonial sword and the royal seal that would prove his authority to any loyal forces they encountered. "Your Majesty," Willem said quietly, using the formal address he had avoided throughout Adrian's childhood. "Your father would be proud of the courage you've shown during this crisis. But he would also want you to be careful and remember that the kingdom's future depends on your survival." Adrian nodded solemnly. "I understand the risks, Willem. But I also understand that a king who won't fight for his people doesn't deserve to rule them. If we're going to preserve this kingdom, we need to show strength and unity, not hide and hope for the best. As the first light of dawn appeared on the horizon, Prince Adrian's military column assembled in the palace courtyard. 50 of the kingdom's most elite soldiers, led by Captain Marcus, would escort the young prince on his perilous journey north. The remaining palace guard would hold Eldermore under siege conditions, prepared to defend the kingdom's heart against any direct assault. Elizabeth stood beside the column, having convinced her father to let her accompany the mission as the expedition's diplomatic representative. Her knowledge of the noble families they might encounter could prove crucial to determining which regions remained loyal to the crown. Remember, Adrian told the assembled nobles and guards who would remain behind, whatever happens in the north, Eldermore Palace must not fall. You are the last line of defense for everything our kingdom represents. The column moved out just as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, their horses' hoofbeats echoing off the cobblestones as they passed through the palace gates. Behind them, the great banner of the royal house flew defiantly from the highest tower, a symbol of resistance against all who would threaten the kingdom's independence. Adrian rode at the head of the column, his young face set with determination despite the fears that gnawed at his heart. Somewhere ahead lay his father and the main royal army, besieged by rebels and possibly unaware of the full scope of the conspiracy they faced. Between them stretched miles of potentially hostile territory, where enemy agents and corrupted nobles might be waiting to complete the assassination that had been interrupted in the palace. But the young prince had learned important lessons during the crisis that had transformed his world. He had discovered that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. He had seen that true leadership meant putting the kingdom's needs above personal safety. And, most importantly, he had realized that the crown he would someday wear was not just a symbol of power, but a commitment to sacrifice everything for the people he served. As the royal column disappeared into the morning mist, the fate of the kingdom hung in the balance. The conspiracy that had begun with a royal guest's seemingly innocent visit had evolved into a war that would test every principle and value the realm held dear. In the days to come, Prince Adrian would face challenges that would either forge him into the king his people needed or destroy him in the attempt. The golden crown that represented his birthright awaited him somewhere ahead, but first he would have to prove himself worthy of wearing it through trials that would determine not just his own destiny, but the future of everyone he had sworn to protect.